All right, there we are. A few minutes late off the mark, but here we are. Sorry for the inconvenience. A few technical glitches. We've got them taken care of. Welcome to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. I'm Nick. He's Joseph. You can tell because he's the far better looking of the two of us. Um, he's got a better beard, at least. I just wanted to, well,
I don't have a better beard. I just have a beard.
I can't. I have tried about a dozen times to grow a beard, and it gets that 3/4 of an inch length, and the itchy just drives me nuts. I can't get past it. So, and it takes me forever to grow any kind of facial hair anyway. Like this is a week's worth of stubble. So 2 weeks, then I got to shave it.
I can't tell, Nick. I'm looking at you, and I just can't tell. Sorry.
Well, you must be looking at me with mother's eyes then, because anybody else can. Anyway, I actually had a first experience here up in Sioux Lookout yesterday. I met a guy one night down at the one of the local docks, because until just recently I've been kind of stuck to the shore. I've got a boat, a small boat, and a small motor now. There's a couple technical issues with the motor I got to sort out, but I now have a boat. And I ran into him. His name is Joe. Nice, really nice guy. And we decided that we were going to go out talking about the different kinds of fish that are around here. And I said, you know what I really like is brook trout. He said, oh, well, I know where there's some brook trout. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, why don't we get together and we'll go out and, I'll show you where these lakes are that have, they're stocked, but they're gorgeous fish. So anyway, finally, after a couple of weeks of yes, no, can't, had to put it off, we finally got out yesterday. It was a beautiful day, and we got let's see, the limit between the two of us was 10 fish, 5 each, and we were too short. So we get eight fish, and boy, I'll tell you, had one last night, delicious, just delicious. So it was a lot of fun, and got to know Joe a little bit. He's a great guy. He's a pilot. Well, he's retired now, but about my age, I guess. And we had a lot of fun. He's got a great setup and a nice guy, and got the chance to learn a little bit more about him. And on top of that, we had a blast catching those brook trout.
Yep, the Nick and Joe conservative talk, rod and reel.
Yep. And that's you know what? You learn a lot about somebody when you're stuck in a 12 or 14-foot aluminum boat with them, and you're there for 4 or 5 hours, and you can't get away. You can't just walk away. You're out in the middle of a lake, and you learn how to be, especially if it's the first time you've done it. Like once you've been out 3 or 4 times, you've got to know each other a little bit. That's fine. You can kind of relax a little bit, right? But you don't know what their attitude is. You don't know what their interests are. You don't know where they stand politically. So you have to couch things very carefully, just to kind of make sure that you don't get tossed out of the boat. So we did a little bit of that, poking and prodding a little bit to find out where each other stands on different things. And it's actually probably the best way to negotiate. If you had to negotiate a deal, take somebody fishing and put them in a boat, and don't bring them back till the deal is done. Yeah, well, no, we didn't do any of that. Wooden Head just said fishing was an excuse to get drunk. We didn't do any drinking when we were out there. You don't want to be in a 12-foot aluminum boat. You don't want to be drinking. It's a bad idea.
Oh.
Now, if you're going to have a shore lunch and you're going to stay overnight, that's a different kettle of fish. If you want to bring some booze with you for later, fine. But all things in moderation, especially when you're at sea. I think Joseph could probably speak to that too. Anyway.
Moderation at sea?
Yes, that's a very good idea. A hard-learned lesson I will share with you sometime. I think I've told you, but as far as the listeners are concerned, I'm not going to get into that tonight. So welcome to all the chatters in the room. We've got Robert and Chrissy and a few others. I think Wooden Head's in there. So if you're listening, John, yeah, you can call or text the show at 613-413-2217. If you go to blasttheradio.com, there is a video link. and you can click on that. You'll go into a waiting room, and we'll bring you on the show, and you can be part of the video experience. So we're looking forward to trying that out. So that'll be coming up. I'm sure we'll have some people take advantage of that in the near future. So you can join us via live cam. Click the camera at blasttheradio.com, and that will get your handsome face right here with Joseph and I, just like you were sitting in the living room having a coffee or a beer.
And mine is coffee. That's what it is. It's really is coffee.
Mine
This
ain't.
is this is not the Tonight Show, and I'm not Ed McMahon.
Have you ever watched that? What's the name of that British comic? He has is it Norton or Norris or something like that? He's um, what the heck is it? Ricky Gervais? I think it's the Ricky Gervais show where he interviews some of the top stars in the world, and he has wine and alcohol right there on the set for them to take advantage of, and they do. So I can just imagine what goes on if that show runs late. Anyway, so
Here we are.
here we are. So I think we got to start, Joseph, with the conversation about the biggest story on the planet right now. And no, it's not COVID, although we do have a COVID story tonight. Um, that is when the FBI raided at 6 o'clock in the morning with 30 armed FBI agents the home of former President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago in I can't talk Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Um, they went in with a warrant. They were looking for documents that they thought should have stayed in Washington. Now, first of all, everybody, everybody who's president takes with them documents relevant to their time in office. And there's sometimes a bit of a debate about which one should stay in Washington and go in the archives, and the other one go into things like private libraries. Like Ronald Reagan did it. That's where the Reagan Library came from. All the presidents have done this. Bush, Obama, Clinton, they've all done this. And there's an act called the National Archives Act or something like that that deals specifically with this issue that's been around since 1978. And whenever there's an issue, you can, like, if somebody doesn't want to surrender it, they can subpoena the documents. They don't need to go in like, this guy's some Mexican drug lord armed to the teeth and just tear the house apart. They were even in Ivanka Trump's wardrobe. The woman hasn't been dead 2 weeks, and they're rooting through her clothes. Now, what do they want in there? I got no idea. They busted into his personal safe. Why would they do that? He's been cooperating with them since he left, or since at least, I'm sorry, this last February. He's given them 15 boxes of documents already. He's already cooperating. So they go and find this magistrate who is a guy who's got his own baggage. He was a lawyer defending some of Epstein's clients. He is a Democratic donor supporting Obama. And, so the guy isn't exactly what you call squeaky clean and impartial. And he signed the warrant allowing the FBI to do this. Now, this I think first of all, Trump has been mulling the idea. I've seen a commercial, a pre-election ad. It was one of the slickest things I've ever seen. It's a very powerful campaign ad. There's no other way to call it, nothing else to call it. And he's talking about how to rebuild the country and, the trouble. He lays out 3-4 points where the country's in trouble. And then he talks about 3 or 4 different ways about how we can overcome this. We're Americans, but there's nothing we can't do. If we put our minds to it, blah, blah, blah. It's clearly a campaign ad. So if he was thinking about it before, I think he's certainly going to do it now. And when you watch the reaction, not just of the Republican base, not just of his base, but even of some Democrats, the Democrats don't want to go anywhere near this. And the FBI and the DOJ, the Department of Justice in the United States, have a lot of questions to answer about why they felt the need to do this. Now, speculation is it's all about trying to criminally link him to January 6th, because, like every other investigation they've launched into Mr. Trump, they come up empty handed and they're desperate to keep him from running in 2024.
Okay, cue me.
That's what that is. That's
So, yeah. So the first thing is, I have to tell you, I wasn't aware about the raid at 6 o'clock in the morning. I
right.
knew about the raid, and and that's not called for. The one thing I will say, Nick, is that my understanding, and I could be totally wrong about this, because I haven't followed the story as closely as you have. That's another thing I can talk about in a minute.
Okay.
But from what I had understood, from what I heard, was that they weren't looking for just documents and things like that related to January 6th, etc., but they were actually looking for classified documents that allegedly, or there was a belief that he had taken with him, in which case that's stuff that, he's not entitled to be taking and keeping in an insecure place. And so, whether or not that's a justification for having an FBI raid, that's a separate issue altogether. But that's what I had heard. Now, again, I don't know. I could be dead wrong about that. That's just what I heard.
Yeah.
So, it seemed to me like there was a certain plausibility to that explanation. Again, FBI doing it 6 o'clock in the morning, not letting his lawyers be there, different issue altogether. Those are legitimate issues to raise. But I'm not sure about what they were actually looking for. But here's the thing, okay? I mean, am I the only person that's tired of this? It's the Donald Trump show, okay? And I'm really tired of it. Nothing against Donald Trump. He's an interesting guy, and I think he did some I think he did some very interesting, some very good things as the president of the United States. And if he runs again and he gets elected, fine. I don't have a dog in the hunt. I don't have a horse in the race, or whatever cliche you want to use. I guess what surprises me, and I know we've talked about this before, is how much attention that everybody in the world is paying to this. And you mentioned it earlier when we were talking pre-production, Nick, how there were networks in the United States, that weren't really covering the story that much. And granted, the networks that weren't covering the story, I think you'll agree, generally seem to be more on the left than on the right.
Right.
But 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 there are some networks that are not covering it. But goodness gracious, here in Canada, CBC's covering it, CTV's covering it, Global's covering it. You were mentioning Australia. I'm sure Sky News in Australia is covering it.
Yep.
Sky News in England has got to be covering it. And if they're not, and probably not just covering it, but covering it wall to wall, and which just, I think, raises some important questions about exactly what is it about this that fascinates everybody around the world, even more than Americans. And there's a troubling aspect to that. I mean, we have issues here that we have to deal with, and important issues. But in many cases, our voters, our citizens, are disengaged from what's happening in Canada
Yep.
because they're fully engaged in what's going on south of the border on issues that they have no say or anything. And or concern. Let me give you an example, okay? While everybody here was covering and talking about the hearings, the Senate hearings in the United States on January the 6th, and all of the events around January the 6th, we were having hearings here on the emergency response, or the invocation of the Emergencies Act by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, on an order in council, and the way that the police had behaved and the government had behaved to demonstrators, principally demonstrators in Ottawa, but not just limited to Ottawa. And there were a number of bombshell revelations with respect to this. For instance, it turns out that there was never any police request for the federal government to invoke the Emergencies Act. Okay, notwithstanding the fact that the Attorney General himself had said that they had done it because they had been asked to do it by police forces. And so, at some point in time, but nobody's paying attention to this here. And
Well,
to me, that's very disturbing.
it is. Look, you and I have lamented that for the whole time we've been together on the air. Um, but I think there's a very good reason why. And then we've got a phone call we're going to get to once I'm finished here. So I'll keep it brief. Uh, Basically, when you're the big kid on the block, anything that happens to you, everybody else is focused on. Whether you have anything to say about it, you can also compare it to the analogy of people who go to a NASCAR race. Half the people want to see the race, the other half want to see the wreck. There's a certain fascination with American politics because it is the world's superpower. Now, China might argue with that lately, but for all of our, all of our lifetimes, the Americans are the big boys, and what happens there affects the rest of the world. So people have a natural affinity. Even they seem to have this desire to be fascinated because, first of all, it's a distraction from what's going on in their own countries, and this is true beyond Canada. I'm talking around the world. That's why Australia is carrying it. That's why India is carrying it. That's why Britain's carrying it, because if they don't carry this, then they got to talk about what's going on in their own world. And with the American ego and the American influence around the world, people are fascinated by this. And I think that's driving a lot of it. So with that said, John, if you could bring up our phone call, we'll take that now. Hello?
Anybody there? Anybody there?
No, there's nobody here. We all went home.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you guys should know by now about Trump. Okay. He's not part of the swamp. He can't be bought. He's not part of the Demon Rat Club. That's why they're after him. Okay. He doesn't want to play their game. So they're going to keep going after him no matter how much they fail and how much they fail. They'll keep going. Come on. And we're up to what now? After the two impeachment, I've been between the two impeachment and January 6th, there was something else. And I can't remember what it was. Now it's Key Largo.
Report.
Yeah, the Mueller report was before that, and that failed. And I marked it on the chat room. It was the Mueller report, was the two impeachments, and now it's January 6th. I'm pretty sure there's something else in between. But the subject I wanted to bring tonight, I don't know if you guys talked to it before, but it's the bloody cops. I'm getting tired. Why is the police following the bidding of the politicians when they're the biggest liar, the biggest crook, the biggest lawbreakers in the world?
Are you talking Canadian or American?
Everywhere in the world.
In the Western world,
here in Canada, and especially here in Canada, we pay their salaries. We're their bosses. It's like they have that disease. I call it the politician disease. As soon as a politician gets elected, he becomes dumb and an idiot. It seems like the disease is affecting cops also. As soon as they become a cop officially, they become dumb and idiots. Don't they know that we are the one paying their salaries? They should be defending us, not defending them. Look at them, Tamara Leach. You know what the only problem with Tamara Leach was? She should have said she was a terrorist. Then Trudeau would have given $10 million, just like Omar.
Yeah, but there's terrorists and then there's terrorists. And if you like the particular brand of terrorism, you'll make a lot of money. If you don't, then it ain't going to work for you.
Well, it's getting beyond, 80% of people still don't pay attention. 80% of people shouldn't be allowed to vote because that's exactly what's happening. They're not paying attention. And you would think that after all this that's happening right now, it's affecting their wallets. It's being more and more expensive, and they're still not paying attention.
Okay, but let me ask you this, because you made a comment. It says 80% should not be allowed to vote. Now, I'm not going to hold you to the percentage, but let's ask the question. If you're not going to allow anyone above the age of, what is voting age, 18? Anybody above 18 to vote, how are you going to sift through who becomes an eligible voter and who doesn't?
Answer, not a security question, but a smart question before you're allowed to go vote.
See, they tried
See
that.
if you're aware of what's going on. See, ask him a question of what's going on right now in the world. Can you tell me something about this? Just like when you call tax, what is the number that you have on line 1,500? You know, something like this.
They tried that in the States, and it blew up in their faces with, I think it was they called them the Jim Crow laws, or where certain groups
Jim
of
Crow
people.
law, that was for the blacks.
Yeah, I know, but what's the difference? What you're doing is you're opposing, and look, just what's his name? Winston Churchill said it best when he said, "My faith in democracy lasts until I have a 5-minute conversation with the average voter." Because first of all, and that was back in the 30s or 40s when there wasn't as much governmental influence in daily life. Today, in order to stay on top of what's going on, you have to make sure that you're watching news and deciphering it correctly, and who knows what that looks like. The news is fractured into left and right. There's no unbiased news out there anymore. The days of Ross Monroe are long gone. So how do you do that? How do you set a standard that the population can meet without being discriminatory or biased against one group or another?
Well, first of all, there's only 3 or 4 topics to be aware of. Okay, it's just that people, when they start talking about this, they keep going on and on and on and on. Okay, right now, what's important is Trudeau's nitrogen law, Trudeau's inflation, Trudeau's carbon tax. You know, simple stuff like that. You know, like people should be aware. Look, I'll give you a perfect example. My mother. She might be 92 years old, but she loves Trudeau. And every time I ask her why, she says, give me an example. Why do you love him? It's just that she doesn't want to be conservative. And when I said, why don't you want to be conservative? Same thing. Nothing comes out. You know, and it was like this all her life. And it's the same thing with a lot of people. There's not that many to keep track of. It's just that they keep.
Yeah, but to be fair to your mother, she comes from a generation where, dare I say, you could trust the government, at least insofar as you knew where they stood ideologically. And that it was in the days when she was a young woman, you know, it was, you had the conservatives, and you had the liberals. And it was, they were all working for what they believed to be the betterment of the country. They just had a different philosophy. Today, that's not it at all. It's all about politics and who's going to get their butt in the big chair, that kind of thing. So, you know, I can understand her resistance to changing horses in her mind midstream. So,
okay, the first thing that people have to, you know, like, it's a given. Politicians don't keep their promises. So why do people keep expecting politicians to keep their promise? Well, I'm going to vote for him. He's going to give me this. He's going to give me that. And every 4 years, it's the same thing. They never do, and people never learn.
I know.
It's so frustrating. Same thing with the cops. Same thing with.
All right, listen, Robert. On that score, you're right. People never learn. I mean, go back to Dalton McGuinty here in Ontario when he said, "I will not raise your taxes 1 penny, but I won't cut them either." You know, the first thing he did in office was not to raise your taxes. He eliminated the law that meant he had to take any tax hike in a referendum to the public that his predecessor had put in place. So, and then he started raising taxes. We should have learned long ago that he should have been fired at the next election for.
He got reelected twice afterwards.
I know that. Look, I share your frustration. I'm just saying that when you look at the whole scheme, and Joseph, anytime you want to jump in,
I'm just listening.
Okay. Yeah, Joseph, I'd like to hear your point of, especially about the cops, please.
All right, Joseph, jump in there. Go ahead.
Well, look, everything that you're saying is it's true. but I'm not sure that I share your solutions, because the truth is that we live in a democracy, and we want our elected officials, our representatives, to have that kind of control over the police, and the fact that it's being abused is not a reason to throw away the proverbial baby with the bathwater.
Okay. This thing about the abuse of the cops. Okay, and instead of doing what they were like the War Security Measures Act, instead of the cops going after the truckers, why didn't they just do like they did the first 3 weeks? Just stand there and make sure there's peace and there's no trouble, and that's it. Why did they have to follow? Trudeau says, okay, now you go in there and arrest all of them. They're all terrorists. They're all xenophobes. Or, like, come on.
Again, it wasn't just Trudeau, okay, but whether it was or it wasn't, okay, let's not dwell on that. Let's not focus on that. The fact is that we want the police to not be powerful enough to challenge or disobey the civil authority, just like the army. And in this case, we're worried about abuse of process, and that's a legitimate thing to be worried about. But the solution to that is you throw the elected officials out of office.
Okay, explain to me abuse of protest. I'm not following.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the police overreacted. They shouldn't have. Okay, I'm not arguing that point. I don't disagree with you on that. But what I'm saying is that the alternative is that the civil authority, okay, lawfully constituted, says to the police, you have to enforce this law this way, and the police have the right to say, no, we're not doing that. Do we want to live in a society? Do we want to live in a society where the police, or the army for that matter, doesn't have to obey the civil authority if they disagree with it? And I'm saying to you that comes along with its own problems that we spent centuries working out. So
what problems? What, Nick? What problems?
Well, how
the
about
cops are smart enough to know what is a just law and what is not a just law. As long as they stand there and they keep peace, like they did before they were told to go in.
Right.
They should have continued doing that, and that's it.
But it's not the example you're using of the current situation or that particular event is not a good example, because that's an example of where it's easy to make the case that the police could have acted differently in a way that was more decent and more lawful.
The cops never asked for the Measures Act. The cops never asked for it.
I understand that.
It's been told over and over again. They never asked for it. Trudeau said they needed it.
But you understand where I'm coming from, Robert, is the alternative is that you establish the principle that the police don't have to listen to the civil authority. And what happens the next time when the police are the ones that are doing the abuse, and the civil authority steps in and says, you can't do that anymore, and orders them to stop, and the police just shrug their shoulders and go, sorry, we're just doing what we want to do. That's what they do in
you tell that to the Dutch farmer. You tell that to the Dutch farmers. You tell that to our farmers once they start revolting with that nitrogen thing. Like tell that to Tamara Leach. Like a political prisoner in Canada.
Well, again, all I'm saying is don't blame the police for that. Blame the political authorities for that.
All right, guys, I have to interject.
They don't have to follow it.
Okay, Joseph. All right, Joseph. Robert, we got to stop you there. It's time to take a break. Great phone call. Thank you very much. And we'll take a break and we'll be back with more on the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right, we are back. I just want to talk about just for a moment here quickly what Kirk said in the chat room. He said, yeah, you're right, Murray. Critical thinking is becoming extinct. And he said, did you catch what they found in Trump's safe? A napkin, birthday dinner menu, Kim Jong signature, still wondering about the former First Lady's closets. Yeah, that's a very good point. You know, part of what really galls me about this is that the fact that you've got Hunter Biden, who, by all accounts, actually committed real crimes and recorded them. We have evidence, solid evidence. Where's the investigation into him? Hillary Clinton was allowed, given weeks, to acid wash her hard drive to remove 33,000 emails on her private server, so that no one would ever know what was in there. And then she beat it to death with a hammer. Okay, like, how come there's no investigation into that? What Trump is guilty of is the equivalent of getting a parking ticket if he violated this act that regulates these kinds of things. It does not warrant the kind of response it got. So, when you look at, if we're all supposed to be equal before the law in the United States, that is the benchmark. We have the same benchmark, so that's why I said we. If we're all supposed to be equal before the law, how do you call this equal when you have one group of elites being ignored and can do whatever they want? So whether it's Justin Trudeau up here or any of the other government officials who have committed what looks to be, at least nefarious, if not criminal, situations. How many investigations? There's a lot of ongoing investigations. They just say, well, we're investigating that, and that's it. You never hear about them again. I'm thinking of the investigation into what happened to Vice Admiral Norman. You got not Angelina Jolie, the what's her name? There was two women. She was Attorney General. No, she wasn't Governor General. Anyway, she was. What the heck was she? Maybe she was Attorney General. Anyway, so there's all kinds of situations in both countries where there is real reason for investigations into what look like criminality, and they get ignored. But political opponents, this is third world banana republic stuff. Okay, this is what third world countries do. They send in their security forces to take out, eliminate, or at least embarrass and or destroy psychologically and politically their opponents. Because I think, who said it? Terry, no, not Terry. Somebody said, somebody in the chat room mentioned that this is all about 2024. And I think, if I was the guy to call what the ticket Mark, I knew it was one of them. Mark said that. If I was building the ticket to run against Biden in 2024, it'd be Trump for president and DeSantis for vice. And oh man, they would be terrified because DeSantis is probably one of the best governors in the U.S. right now, along with the governor for Texas, who's doing a great job. But you put Trump out front and have him, you have somebody with substance as the vice president, the Democrats would be wiped off the map. I just don't think there'd be anything left of them.
Yeah, well,
I'm not calling the shots, though.
no, well, it's a point of view, Nick. I'm not, there are. I'm not convinced that Trump is going to run. I'm not convinced that if he runs, he's going to win the nomination, and I'm not convinced that if he wins the nomination, that he's going to be able to win a general election. He could, in fairness, full disclosure, I didn't think that Donald Trump could win the nomination back in 2016, and he did. So, I could be dead wrong about that. I know it's a shock to you, Nick, and to our listeners and our viewers, but I've been wrong before. And
that is shocking.
I could end up being wrong again at some point in time in the future.
Here's what we'll do. We will bet a beverage between the two of us. I think not only does Trump win the nomination, but I think he wins the next election if they can't find a way to derail him between now and then.
See, here's the thing. I think it's really important. I think it's really important to keep a couple of factors in mind. The first factor is that a lot of Republicans don't like Donald Trump. And now, partisanship being what it is, if he wins the nomination, they'll probably get behind him because they like the Democrats even less than they like Donald Trump. So I think there's that to be said. But I don't think there's any way on God's green earth that the Democrats, if Biden wins or if Biden survives his term, I don't think I think he runs for a second term. Okay, I think there were too many problems with him.
Oh no,
he won't. Too many health issues.
His decline is just ridiculous.
So let's remember that. Okay, Trump is not going to run against Biden. Nobody's going to run against Biden. I think Kamala Harris I think she's a wild card.
Wild card.
I think that prior to becoming vice president or becoming nominated for vice president, she was intriguing, but unfortunately being tied to or hitched to the Biden wagon, I think has done her tremendous damage. So I'm not sure that she could win the nomination either.
There's not a snowball's chance. That's the problem.
So what happens when the Democrats actually put up a serious candidate against Donald Trump or against the Republicans?
Who are they going to put up?
Well, I don't know right now. I don't have an answer to that.
They have no one.
Well, I don't know if I would say that.
There's not a one of them would stand a chance.
I don't know if I would say that. I don't know. This is the problem, Nick.
Hang on. I'm not going to let you wiggle out of this bet. Do you accept my terms?
I'm not wiggling out of any bet.
Okay.
You want to? Okay, fine.
Okay.
Are we allowed to do that? Of course, we're not regulated yet. I'll bet you. You want a case of beer? I'll bet you a case of beer.
Well, I was thinking of a bottle of whiskey, but okay.
I'll bet you a bottle of whiskey. Not a problem.
All right, done.
Okay, so there you go. Okay?
Winner gets to pick what he
wants. We've got all of these witnesses, and of course, this is going to be on YouTube now, so everybody's going to hear it, right?
That's
or
right.
Be able to watch it. So there's no way I'm going to be able to get out of the bet. But there's no way you're going to get out of the bet either. Okay.
That's right. Listen, I'm willing to take the chance. I'm willing. I'm more than happy to do it.
It's here. The problem is, and this is not unique to the United States. It's we see this really everywhere in the democratic world, in particular, the Western world, and that is that we become so fixated on the extremes, the fringes, because they're so fascinating. Okay,
Yeah,
they
they
just
are that.
capture our attention.
They
But
are that.
there are sound, solid Democrats in the United States, and there are a lot of Republican representatives. Like, well, DeSantis is one of them. Okay, for instance,
My God.
Mike Pence. Mike Pence would make a great president, I think, of the United States.
I think so too.
There are very good. Okay, now don't get excited when I say this, and that's not directed to you, Nick. That's directed to our viewers and
Okay.
our listeners. Okay, there are a lot of sane politicians. Now, I'm not saying Donald Trump is not sane. I'm just being figurative here. Okay, they're
Okay.
on both sides of the political aisle, and I listen. And I'm not defending the Democrats. I think there are a lot of kooky Democrats, and I think there were more kooky. I think there are more kooky Democrats than there are kooky Republicans.
Why does Chucky Schumer come to mind?
Okay, I mean, but okay, the two things to bear in mind to keep here, we don't know who the Democrats are going to dominate. We don't know who Trump is going to run against for the nomination. And again, I think you have to keep in mind that there are a lot of Republicans that don't like Donald Trump, and so
Yeah.
that's a little bit of an unknown that's hard to really measure.
Well,
But yeah, it's
I think once he announces a
the
lineup behind him like dominoes.
the other thing to bear in mind, and we touched on it in the last segment okay, is how disengaged voters are, that they really are only paying attention to some of the stuff. So I I don't know.
You know
It's
something,
really
Joseph?
hard. It's really hard to handicap this
Let
whole
me
thing.
let me throw this at you.
Sure.
I don't know that the disengagement is quite as profound as you think, and that is for pocketbook reasons. Whether it be in Canada or in the United States, people are beginning to pay attention because it's hitting them in the wallet. The price of fuel, as an
Yeah.
example, the inflation rate, the fact that people's savings are being eaten alive by inflation. You've got in the United States, you've got all kinds of different issues with the southern border. There's the ongoing war in Ukraine, and people are legitimately asking, why are we sending? In our case, we sent 20-some billion um, to Ukraine, but nothing. Or no, it's 250 million we sent, but nothing for our own guys. And people are beginning to sit up and take notice of this, and they're saying, wait a minute, where's all this coming from? And I think you're going to see a much larger attention. I don't know about turnout at the ballot box. That you never know until afterwards, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, everybody, they're going to be, oh, the voters are going to turn out like crazy over there. Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But I think the attention paid to this is going to be much higher than we're used to seeing.
Okay.
And that, I'm telling you, there's networks out there that are feasting on this. Like, look at Fox as an example. They're eating this alive.
Yeah, I know, but look, not everybody watches Fox, which is another problem because the news networks have become so partisan and
Yeah, well,
politicized
that's what I was
themselves.
referring to before.
So it's and I'm not saying that we need to do anything about that. I think that it's evolved naturally to a degree, and I think that if it's going to be corrected, it has to be corrected naturally, organically as well. I'm very much opposed to the government stepping in and saying we're going to fix it and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so but look, these are all very real problems, Nick. But I don't know. Call me a cynic, okay? But I had
You're a
a
cynic.
conversation. I had a conversation here in Ottawa. Okay, the last city council here in Ottawa passed a climate change plan. And a couple of things that one of the things is like they want to mandate the conversion of the city from fossil fuel generated heat to electric heat. So houses, apartment buildings, office buildings, etc., that at some point in time they're going to be retrofitted, if all of this goes through, okay,
Right.
are supposed to be retrofitted to electric heat. So how are you going to generate that kind of electricity? Because we don't have access to that kind of electricity. Well, they have a plan. There is a plan. Part of the plan is that they're going to generate electricity by building 710 wind turbines in the city
Right.
and 36 square kilometers of solar
Solar
panels. Okay. So, and amongst a whole bunch of other things. And the whole plan is going to cost approaching $60 billion. So I'm speaking with somebody the other day, and this topic comes up. Someone in Ottawa, an informed person, a person who votes, follows the issues, etc. And I mentioned this to him, and he's going, wow, $60 billion, that's a lot. But of course, Biden's plan is 200 and some $billion. So maybe it's not so much after all. And I said to him, I said, just, do you understand? Okay, this is not Ottawa federal government. This is Ottawa municipal government. This is just the city of Ottawa. This isn't Ottawa telling the rest of the country what they're going to do for the whole country. This is city council in Ottawa saying what they're going to do in Ottawa. $60 billion. Okay.
You realize that's
And
three times what we
now,
spend on
he
defense?
freaked out. What? No, that's not possible. I'm going, yeah, that's the plan. Okay. They haven't voted to implement it yet, but they have voted to approve the plan. So it's part of this climate change master plan. My point is this, okay? Just using this as an example, nobody knows. And we're talking about people who are actually politically engaged. And so when you say, well, people are going to pay more attention this time, well, maybe they will. And I don't mean to sound too cynical, but, it's really hard to get people to pay attention to some of these bigger issues, particularly if they're not necessarily hitting them in the pocketbook right now.
Well, I think the price of gas, that one issue, because it affects so many others, the price of fuel,
Sure.
is going to get people out. It's going to drive. I think it's going to drive them to the ballot box.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I certainly let's put it this way. I hope that's what happens.
Look, they're not going to
right.
have a general.
Voters can be fickle.
There's no presidential election in the United States until 2024, and it's highly likely that we won't have a federal election here until 2024, 2025. By that time, who knows what's going to be happening?
Yeah.
If you believe the climate alarmists, we may not even be around anymore. Okay.
Well,
so,
what's that old saying about a week in politics is a lifetime?
Yeah. Well, as somebody once pointed out, quite to Mr. Keynes, when they in a debate they pointed out that his economic models didn't work in the long term, and his response to that was, you may be right, but in the long term we're all dead. So now I don't know, that might just be apocryphal. I don't know that was actually the truth, but it's a cute story, and it really illustrates part of the problem. And this is a totally different subject altogether, somewhat related, but it goes back to we live in a society now where so many people, the vast majority of people, just don't see themselves as being placed in a time where there's a past and a future that they have some allegiance or responsibility to. They see themselves as absolute free agents. So when you see yourself as an absolute free agent, what do you care what happens 10 years from now? I want to be entertained now. I want the goodies now. And hey, if I got to do it on credit, I'll do it on credit, because I deserve to have that that big screen TV now. No more putting money away for this stuff. I could buy it on credit. Of course, now that with interest rates going up, man, that's going to hurt people.
You're right. It is. Okay. I just want to remind people you can join us at 613-413-2217. If you want to join us on the phone, we certainly love to take your phone calls. You can text us at that number as well. And you can go to blasttheradio.com, click I think it's the camera icon, John, is right? Go there if you want to join us via video. We certainly would love to have you join us that way. With that said, it's about time we got to kind of reset the clock because we're off to a late start. Went a little long in the first segment. We are changing gears when we get back. We've got other topics a little more Canadian centric, but I'm just going to leave it at that, and we'll tease you with a little bit. So stick around. We'll be back with more on the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I just want to remind you again, 613-413-2217 to call in or text, and go to blasterradio.com to hit the camera icon and join us via video. We're certainly looking forward to the first time that happens, and we'd like it to be you. Anyway, with that said, changing gears, coming back home north of the border, because we do have our own problems up here. As fascinating a conversation as you can have about American politics, we have plenty of fascinating conversation to have up here in north of the border. There is an article today that it's today. How do I put this? It's titled. This one got my attention. It's called "The Emperor Has No Science." Now, I posted it on Facebook, and I posted it on Twitter, and I'll read from it a little bit just to give people a sense of the article. They can go and look it up. It's from a website called TBF. Here's the part I want to read. It's the opening, let's say, two, 3 paragraphs. For nearly a year, the Prime Minister Trudeau and Health Minister Duclos aggressively browbeat Canadians that mass vaccination was the only way out of the pandemic. They mandated the experimental mRNA injections, denied livelihoods and even employment insurance benefits to those that refused, openly and repeatedly vilified and with full-throated rhetoric normalized the persecution and discrimination of unvaccinated Canadians. The Prime Minister mused if we should tolerate such people, and Minister Duclos encouraged provinces to criminalize being unvaccinated. They did this all under the constant refrain that they were following the science, listening to the experts, and following public health advice and recommendations. It was all a lie. Last week, the Epoch Times and freelance reporter Rupa Subramaniana, I think that's how you say it, broke the story that the Trudeau Liberal government has absolutely no science or recommendation to implement their unconstitutional vaccine mandate for travel. Their stories are completely based on the sworn testimonies of senior. Now they're talking about the the Reporter and Epoch Times. Their stories are completely based on the sworn testimonies of senior public servants found in recently released court documents related to ongoing lawsuits against the federal government's travel. It cannot be stressed enough that not a single government witness was able to present or even confirm the existence of any scientific evidence supporting the travel mandates or recommendations to implement such mandates. And he goes on in a similar vein, but that's the part I wanted to share. There's no science that backs up any of this stuff. There was no reason for the mandates. There was no reason to impose this kind of thing on the Canadian population. And you know something, Joseph? You and I have been talking about this. Well, for the longest time, we tried to avoid COVID because that's all anybody was talking about, and we wanted to be a voice that concentrated on the other issues that were being ignored. Well, COVID's kind of died down in the news, so now, it's not such a bad thing to talk about it. This, though, talk about an egregious misuse of power. Talk about, you wonder why people don't trust the government, and I'm talking about it and its agencies, as Robert was alluding to earlier. You can't travel because you might infect somebody. So if you're not inoculated, you can't get on. No science to back that up. If you don't get inoculated, you're going to lose your job. No science to back that up. Over and over and over again, we were told for the past 24 months that unless you follow what the government tells you to do, you are going to have your life turned upside down. And it was all a lie. And man, I'm telling you, I think you and I should take a little pat on the back because we've been saying this since day one, that this is nonsense, that there's no reason for this. The disease did not warrant this kind of action. We could sit here and rattle off a whole bunch of things we said over the last 2 years, but let's face it, we got it right. The government was lying to us all along.
Yeah, I don't. That's strong language. I don't know that I would say they were lying. I would say that they were misinformed and they passed on misinformation as well. There were a lot of people talking this way, and there was also a problem, of course, with fear, and I think that's actually probably, from my perspective, the real tragedy is that someone once said that. If you sow the wind, you're going to reap the whirlwind. Well, you sowed the wind when it came to fomenting fear about people transmitting COVID, about people dying and that. I read recently that we had more deaths so far in 2022 than we had so far today, up to now, than we had in all of 2021. And my memory, I'm not entirely sure, but it seems to me that the story was not just 2021, but since the beginning of the whole COVID scare. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking, well, so basically what you're saying to me is that the situation in terms of the transmission of this illness and the death rate of this illness seems to be higher, and using that term cautiously because obviously there are a lot of variables in that I'm not taking into account possibly, but it's easy to make the case right now that the pandemic is worse now than it was, say, 12 months ago, when the government was really fomenting fear and saying you have to do this, we have to do that, and it's as with all things, is that when people are afraid, then they do things, and I think that I don't want to. It sounds like I'm just giving them a pass. I'm not giving them a pass because you expect more from our leaders, but remember, our leaders are just human beings, and as I say, they've only put their pants on one leg at a time, like the rest of us, which is really hard for people to understand. People do not understand how normal our political leaders are, okay, and having rubbed shoulders with a lot of these guys over the years, right up to the prime minister and at one point in time the governor general, I did some speech writing for one of the governors general. They're just normal people. And so they get afraid, they hear the stories, and all of a sudden it sort of takes off. And now, when I say about reaping the whirlwind, now, when everything seems to be going okay, even though we still have this so-called pandemic, people are out there. There are people out there that are still deadly afraid of this. And you know, you'll go through grocery stores, and you know, I won't say half of the people are wearing masks, but a good percentage of them are, maybe approaching half of the people. I still see people walking down the bicycle path behind our place, Nick, out in the open with nobody around them wearing their masks. They're afraid. They are genuinely afraid.
Well,
And I don't think they have a reason to be particularly afraid, but they are afraid, and that's because we've made them afraid.
on that, you and I will agree. Um, but that's part of what the government is supposed to do, is provide um, information that is relevant and accurate. And if
Yeah.
they can't take the time to look at the kind of information they're putting out, they're the ones who are supposed to be questioning the scientists. They're the ones who are supposed to be saying, okay, if we come out with this,
Yeah.
are we going to have to backpedal on this later? There was none of that. They just took it and ran with it because it fed into their narrative.
Well, what narrative, Nick?
The
I mean,
idea
I
that the
know
government,
I'm playing the devil's advocate
yeah, I
here a
get it. I
lot tonight,
understand.
but what's the narrative? Okay.
The narrative is that the state is now our new religion. It's the state
Uh,
is going to hold your hand from cradle to grave and look after you. And if you don't like it, tough. We're going to make you do it. It's this whole idea. It's always about control. That's what governments do these days, is they want to control their populations for two reasons. One, a bunch of sheep are a lot easier to control than free thinking people are, who are not afraid to stand up and say, hey, why are we doing this? Okay. And the other reason is it keeps them in power, because now you feel grateful for the blessings that flow from the states and you want to keep that coming. And you see it all the time in the different welfare programs and things like that that are out there, that people just look at the COVID, what do they call it there, the payments they made to people, $2,000 a month or whatever it is, depending on what your income was. All of that's all part of it, to get you even more attached to these so-called freebies from the state. And
I
people don't stop and think. They're not, they never runs through their mind. It's not free.
see.
You're paying for it. As a matter of fact, you're paying a lot more for it than if you did to yourself privately what they want to do from the government.
See, Nick, this is where you and I disagree. You give the government far too much credit. Okay.
I don't want to give them
I-
any credit at all.
No, what I mean is, okay, it takes thought and planning to come up with and execute a conspiracy. And I don't believe that government has the capacity to do what you're doing, what you're suggesting. I think that they stumbled along into this. I think that we as people tend to believe the worst thing to start with. I think that's a psychological thing that we all tend to suffer from. And there was an element of not knowing also. This was a new virus, and how many of these movies, these great disaster movies, like one of the most popular television series in recent years was Walking Dead. Okay, so you have all these apocalypse movies, and some people are genuinely afraid, and they're afraid of the unknown. So what happens here is that the government does all of this stuff, but they're not doing it because they want to have control, and they're using this as an excuse. Okay, and I know there are a lot of people out there that are listening and watching who are going to go, that Ben-Ami, he's drinking the Kool-Aid. And I promise you, I'm not. I've been in government from time to time too much to fall for that. Okay, it's they're not capable of planning and executing a plan of this nature on such a broad scale. Okay, and so when we have a situation where the government gets more and more control, and we become as a society more and more addicted to government, okay, it's almost accidental. Okay, I want to say it's evolutionary. Okay, but it's not. It's regressive. Maybe I don't know. But it's not because the government has this big plan to have one world government. There are people in government, okay, and in NGOs out there that believe in one world government, and they believe that government should be doing all these things, but they're individual kooks, okay, that don't really have the kind of influence that you think that they have. Now, what I'm saying is good news. It's bad news and it's good news. It's bad news because when everybody's doing it, because when everybody's going along with this stuff, because almost accidentally we're just sort of going with the flow, it's hard to be able to put your finger on exactly where the pressure points are, that if we exert pressure here, here, and here, then we're going to be able to change the flow, okay,
Well,
or reverse the flow.
let
But
me
the other thing, but the good news is that it isn't planned, and because it isn't planned, it's kind of erratic, okay, if you will. And
I'm not gonna
anyway,
I'm
go
not
ahead,
gonna
Nick.
cut him as
I'm
much.
rambling a little bit here.
That's okay. I do it too. Uh, I'm not so sure that it isn't planned. Is it well executed? Okay, you got a point. I mean, I don't think these guys could run a one man race to a 2 man outhouse. They can't run a wheelbarrow, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to try. And that's part of the problem, is because
But
they are so inept.
but they're not Nick. They're not trying to gain control. Here's where I think the problem lies. Okay, they're not trying to control us per se. They're trying to save us
From what?
from ourselves.
I'll take care of that. See,
You
this is
see,
part of.
we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, I
Okay,
know. I mean, look, we're
and
playing
I'm
a
far
little bit of.
better at looking after myself than the government is. But the point is, it's funny. I was reading Margaret Thatcher's memoirs recently, and she was talking about a Labor MP, and we've all heard this before, or maybe we haven't, but and the name of this Labor MP in the in the UK escapes me right now, but she was reminding people of what this guy once said, in public, and that is that of course the government knows better than you do what's best for you. We have the experts, and that's the mentality. It's the mentality isn't we need one world government per se. It's not I want control. It's that I care for the people. I care. And this is why people like Justin Trudeau are still so popular in large swaths of society, is because he cares.
No, see,
Okay?
okay, you're right. We disagree because I don't think he cares a whit. I
I
think
think you're dead wrong about that. I think he cares
no
deeply.
way, no way does he care about anybody but Justin Trudeau.
I don't know about that.
All he cares about, because everything he does, he puts on this facade. He goes abroad, embarrasses us on a regular basis. Now, maybe he's dull-witted enough not to understand how badly he's embarrassed us so many times on everything from his trip to India to
Yeah.
NATO summits to you name it. He goes on
But
the world stage and he's a laughing stock.
but
But
Nick,
maybe he's not bright enough to figure that out.
but Nick, I consider myself to be. Let me shed the veneer of humility for a moment. I think I'm a little smarter and a little more worldly and a little more experienced and understanding, maybe even a little wiser than Justin Trudeau.
I would
Okay,
hope so.
all right, but guess what? I've done things that are deeply embarrassing to
Yeah, but not to the
to
whole
my
country,
family and
Joseph.
to, eh?
Not to the whole country. And if you
Well,
did,
that's because I'm not in a position to do it to the whole
okay, but
country.
if you did, if you were, I think
I
that
don't know.
there's enough substance within Joseph Ben-Ami that you would stand up and say, "Hey, that was my bad. I really screwed that up.
I
Here's how we're going to
probably
fix it
I
and move on."
probably would.
But where
and
is
that's
that with
because,
this guy?
well, but again, that's not so much because he thinks, that he wants to have control over society. That's just a personal shortcoming. I mean, you and I were raised in families. I mean, I don't know about you, but my parents did not believe in self-esteem,
They certainly didn't promote it as
and
the
which is
number
funny
one
because
virtue.
the fact that my parents didn't believe in propping up my self-esteem, the net result of that was I have better self-esteem than other people do, because I like to think that I've earned it, and I have a much better sense of my own shortcomings, and I work to fix them, to improve myself. I don't go to pieces when all of a sudden I realize that I'm not, the center of the universe.
But
But
see, this
I have my parents to thank for that. I think
okay.
did I ever tell you this story? I'm sure I've told you this story, Nick. I'm sure I've said it on our show, but
Go ahead.
okay, but think I was in grade 2 or grade 3 or I don't know. And so I walk home from school for lunch, and I never figured that out, because why did my mother make me come home for lunch? Everybody stayed. It was a half rural school, and
Right.
I had to walk. Seriously, I had to walk like a 3/4 of a mile to come home for lunch. Okay,
You got home, grabbed a sandwich,
and this
turned
is
around,
not the
walked back.
yeah, this is not the both sides uphill barefoot, okay, or both directions uphill barefoot story. Seriously, okay. So I only had time to come home, have a sandwich, quickly have a bite to eat, and rush back out so that I was back at school for the afternoon classes. But that's a different story. So I'm sitting there and and I'm kind of forlorn and everything. And my mother looks at me and she says, "Okay, so what's the problem? What's wrong with you?" Okay, and I said to her, I said, I don't have any friends. And my mother looked at me, and looked at me, and then she said something that was life changing for me, even at such a young age. She looked at me and she said, "So?" And I looked at her, and then I thought, yeah, so, no play groups, none of this. Okay, oh, my poor boy, he needs to be socialized and stuff like that. And I think I'm better. I think I'm more socialized because of it, because things happen naturally. They weren't constructed and planned out and mapped and orchestrated and stuff like that. So I have good self-esteem,
So
and
you're
because of
saying
that,
then,
it's easier for me to admit when I'm wrong.
so you're
And
saying then that
that's
she
kind of a
didn't.
roundabout way of getting to that point, by the way.
Okay, but so what I'm trying to say is she didn't want you to come home just to watch the Flintstones.
Did the Flintstones play on TV? I think the Flintstones were on, now that you mention it, at that
Yeah,
time.
I'm just looking at Terry Toll's comment. He, he said
Yeah,
she wants you to come home and watch the Flintstones.
and no, she definitely didn't want me to come home and watch the Flintstones.
Okay, but you know something, and look, I hear you loud and clear. But when you consider what our next topic is going to be, uh, and you start thinking about, does he really care about people? Then, and I'm talking about our glorious leader. I don't think he cares about anything but himself, and just he's a nihilist.
Well,
He's
you know
just
what, Nick, this is a problem with the left generally. Okay, it's not just, again, let's not fixate on Justin Trudeau or on any individual. Okay, there's a real problem with the left and with the statists in the world,
well, he's one
and
of them.
that is that when you plan things, okay, you become very wedded, very committed to the plan. And so what ends up happening is you have a plan to deal with homelessness. But all of a sudden, okay, you become the following through with the plan, and your commitment to the plan becomes more important, or as important, if not more important, than the actual results. So there are many programs where they're not really very effective, at dealing at providing the kind of assistance that they're intended to provide. And so, but the problem is that people out there, they start to think, well, we have to have this program. We have to spend X billion dollars providing affordable housing, because if we don't, then if the government's not doing it, it's not going to happen. Healthcare is a much better, perfect example. If somehow or other the government isn't running and orchestrating and controlling healthcare, then people are not going to have healthcare. And my answer to that is, well, they don't have healthcare now under the system. But you know who had healthcare without the government running it were my parents before they had universal government run health insurance. And great example of this, Nick, very briefly. I know we've talked about this before, but we have a lot of new listeners and viewers now, so maybe they haven't heard this before. But there used to be in Pembroke, you used to live out not far from Pembroke before you moved out to where you are now. But the city of Pembroke used to have 2 hospitals. And what's the population of the city of Pembroke?
I'm going to guess about 10 grand.
10,000 people?
Yeah, about that.
2 full hospitals. And when one of the hospitals was run by was originally a Catholic hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember when they were talking about they were closing hospitals, etc. And they ended up closing. First, they closed down some of the services in the hospital, in one of the hospitals in Pembroke. Then they shut down one of the hospitals altogether. And I remember having a debate with one of the officials from the health department at the time, and his question was, the way he put it was, we have to ask ourselves, in this era when we have to tighten our belts, etc., we have to control government spending, all good stuff, whether or not a community the size of Pembroke needs to have 2 hospitals. And my response to that when I took the podium was to say to him, you're asking the wrong question. The question you're asking is, how is it that before we had public health care, okay, a community the size of Pembroke, which was smaller than it is now, could afford to have 2 full-service hospitals? That's the question that you need to ask yourself. And the answer to that is, okay, one of them, well, they were private hospitals. So here's the thing about private hospitals, okay, is that if you could afford to pay, you paid. If you could only afford to pay in installments, you paid in installments. If you couldn't afford to pay at all, or if you could only afford to pay a certain amount, then you'd pay a reduced rate. And if you couldn't afford to pay at all, then you wouldn't have to pay at all. And so the question is, how do you police that? Well, you didn't have to, because these hospitals ran on donations from service clubs and from individuals. And if it ever got out into the public that they were refusing to treat patients who couldn't afford to pay, then their donations would have dried up. They wouldn't have been able to collect any kind of donations for the hospital. So the system policed itself.
Right.
And nobody was dying in the streets because of lack of health care. And there was certainly no talk of shutting down emergency wards, which we're doing. Emergency departments now in Ottawa are being shut down on weekends because they don't have the staff. Now, granted, we have, we have more staff, we have different, it's a different system now than it was, 50 years or 60, 70 years ago. So I want to be careful not to be accused of comparing apples and oranges, but a lot of the regulations and requirements that add to the overall cost are actually the government and putting in those regulations, and all of that is for one reason: to care for people. Okay, see, that's the key that you have to understand, is that It's not about control. It's about caring. And the argument that I make is that if you really care, then you have to be more flexible with how you're doing these programs, because ultimately the programs are not helping the people that they're intended to help. And
Well,
healthcare is just a good example of it.
yeah, look, there's no arguing that since government got involved in healthcare, it has been degraded. No matter, look, I tend to agree with you that a lot of people go into these with good intentions. Like, I'm not going to say these are evil people, but if you take teenage pregnancy, if you take healthcare, if you take emergency services, any of the hardcore services that we have come to rely on, it's people's attitude. Well, who else would do it? And the answer is, well, who did it before?
Yeah,
It's
but
not like all of a sudden the country sprung out of the ground 50 years ago.
right.
We have almost 200 years worth of history, where people took care of each other
Right.
because that was the best way to do things.
And well, the only way to do things, and it worked. And of course, that's the tragedy. The tragedy is that we have raised now 2, 3, 4 generations in so many areas, not just healthcare, where people actually don't understand the concept of people helping people.
Yeah.
Without a state intermediary.
A great example of that is to look at the level of volunteerism has been dropping every year as kids graduate from high school.
Well,
A lot of times in days past, people would go into volunteer groups because they felt like they wanted to give something back. I hate that term, but if you wanted to help out the country or the community you're part of, you would join the Lions, or you join the Rotary Club or the Knights of Columbus, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Well, they're having a hard time recruiting these kids now because there is no sense of community in the traditional sense.
Right. And it wasn't a question of, oh, I want to give back to my community. It was that this just was the thing to do.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
When you were an adult and you're gainfully employed, you have communal responsibilities. But now I don't have a communal responsibility because I pay the government to do this. So why should I look after the homeless guy down the street? What they used to do in our community, in the Jewish community back in the old country, was that people would come to the synagogue on a daily or a weekly basis or whatever, if you knew that somebody didn't have a place to stay or a place to eat, maybe they had a place to stay but they were poor, they couldn't afford proper meals and stuff like that, then you'd invite them to your home for meals, okay? Right. And people in the community did this, and it wasn't controlled, it wasn't organized. Maybe to a certain degree there was some communal organization, but it wasn't run by the state. Right. So what's happened is that the state has taken over so many of these things on the belief that the state can do it more efficiently. And at the beginning, there could have been an argument for that, but it's just not anymore. You can't sustain that argument anymore. But
before we go to a break, because we have to take one, I want to make a point based on what Maggie had to say. She said her comment is cost increase at hospitals is the expense of CEOs and board of directors. I remember healthcare before universal healthcare. Okay, so the point I want to make is she's right. We're spending a lot of money on chief executive officers. Like, why does somebody running a hospital have to make $500,000 a year?
I have an even better question. Okay, how is it that the guy's making $500,000 or more than $1 million in some communities in this country, okay, running the hospitals, and they're not for profit?
Yeah,
see, that's the not for profit fiction. The not for profit fiction, okay, is that it's not a share. There are no shares, therefore the hospital doesn't make a profit, but it doesn't have to make a profit because who cares whether I'm earning $1 million in dividends or I'm earning $1 million salary? It's the same thing. So this whole not-for-profit thing is a bit of a fiction. But
Yeah,
again, it sounds good, right?
because I think Maggie is a new listener, and I want to remind all our listeners and people posting in the chat room, we're reading all your comments, and sometimes if Joseph's talking and I suddenly just kind of laugh to myself or smile, it's because of something I'm reading in the comments section. It's not based on what Joseph's saying, because Joseph's.
Well,
Well,
sometimes it is
he
based
can
on
be
what
a
I'm
funny
saying.
guy, but usually he's pretty serious. All right. With that said, we're a little late for our break, so we'll take it now. We'll be back in about 60 seconds or so. You listen to this. We'll be back with more with the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Okay, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show. I want to remind the listeners, you can call us at 613-413-227 or text to the same number. You can also go to blasterradio.com, click on the camera icon, and that will get you a video link, and you can join us just like Joseph and I are talking on video, as well as if you want to call in or whatever. So it gives you another way to participate. Let's put it that way. All right. So we beat that one pretty much to death, Joseph. I think that a lot of money has gone into administration instead of frontline services that would make our healthcare a lot better if we did that. I think that's a fair way to summarize. We could do show after show after show after what's wrong with healthcare in Canada. But I wanted to move on. There's another topic now. If you've done any, and I know Joseph, you do a lot of do a lot of traveling, so this you'll be excited about. What the government has decided to do, because this has been a disaster since the beginning. This whole ArriveCan feature, you're supposed to log onto your phone so you can get through customs faster. Well, it's been a disaster, and there's no arguing that. I mean, I think there's three right now: Toronto, Vancouver, and maybe Calgary. I forget which the other. There's about three airports where you have to go through this because they're the biggest airports in the country.
You have to go through it. You have to go through it everywhere that you cross the border.
Okay, well, now they're moving it off to more airports because it works so well.
No, everywhere you cross the border, including if you drive across the border, if you come across a land crossing, you have to use the ArriveCan app. It's not just airports. It's anywhere you cross the border, anywhere you come into Canada. Okay, you have to use the ArriveCan app.
It's been, well, no matter where it's been used, it's been a disaster. It's caused long lines with large ripple effects. Like if you are flying out of Pearson, as an example, going to Europe, or the other way around, coming from Europe, um, and you miss flights, or flights are delayed, or things like that because of this app, and well, that ripples out into the rest of the flying public, because now you're going to delay planes or miss planes in foreign airports. There's an interconnectivity here that I don't think they thought through very well. So let me share with you a little bit of this story, and then we can talk about it.
Sure.
In recent weeks, there have been increasing calls to scrap the ArriveCan app as users highlight its bugs and glitches. On Wednesday, instead of signaling that the use of the app is coming to an end, the government announced that its features are being expanded to even more airports across the country. The Canada Border Services Agency released a statement detailing their plan to modernize and expedite the travel experience. The CBSA is now providing travelers the option to submit their customs and immigration declaration up to 72 hours in advance of their arrival in Canada through ArriveCan. They explain the feature is currently only available for international travelers arriving in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, but that in the coming months it will be expanded to include 7 other Canadian airports: Winnipeg, Halifax, Calgary, Edmonton, Ottawa, Quebec City, and Toronto's Billy Bishop. According to the CBSA, the advanced declaration of features reduces the amount of time travelers spend at kiosks upon arrival by 1/3. You know how to really put a hole in the lineups? Can the damned app. Just scrap it. It's been a mess. There's no reason to, the only country in the world that does this is us. No other country is doing this.
Yeah, I actually have a better idea.
What's that?
As I have arrived from out of the country at Pearson Airport, and when you go through customs and immigration, the you could have, I don't know how many lines or how many booths they have, 24, 30 or whatever. And I've never come through there where they've had more than 4, 5, or 6 of them open. And certainly half of them closed. And so I've never understood that. It seems to me that the first thing you need to do if you want to speed the process up is to, just
Open more booths.
open up the booths so that you have more people processing. But I just don't. There's a certain, again, we come down to people just making assumptions, right? I don't think that speaking personally now, as somebody who's used the app, okay, I don't think it makes things faster or slower, unless of course you have the glitches. That's a different thing, because when you're relying on technology and the technology doesn't work, then you're going to have delays and glitches for sure, and that has caused some problems. But just in terms of, if you want to speed the process up, I don't see that filling in your customs information. Well, first of all, I don't know how you can fill in your customs information 72 hours before you come arrive back in the country, because the truth is I might want to make purchases and stuff like that beforehand. But that's I'm quibbling maybe a little bit there.
No, I think you make a good point.
But I just don't see how it speeds things up. I come into the country. Before coming in, I fill in my customs paper. I don't do it at the kiosk. I do it on the plane. Okay. Or if I'm crossing a land border where I don't fill out paperwork at all, and I still have to do this even though I have the ArriveCan app, and I use the ArriveCan app because you have to, even at a land border. So maybe they're talking about, coming through at customs and stuff like that. So there is no, that I've seen so far, there's no customs section in the ArriveCan app. So maybe that's what they're talking about in terms of adding that. But I drive up to the border crossing, They ask me if I have anything to declare. If I have something to declare, I tell them. The guy writes it down. What's the monetary value? Writes it down. Can you please go in? I have to go in anyway because I have to go in to pay if I owe if I owe duty. So what does it matter whether I'm doing this on my app or not? Unless you're suggesting that I just do it on the app and pay with Google Pay or something like that. I don't know.
Who
I guess
knows?
what I'm saying is that I just don't see that this speeds things up. Okay, I'm not anti-technology. Okay, great. I love technology. I like all of the new gadgets and stuff like that. But let's be real. Okay, not at all of this stuff is interesting. It's fun
Well, you
in
know
some
something.
cases, but it doesn't
You just
necessarily have a great practical benefit.
you just tripped to something in my head that I wanted to talk about last week. We didn't get a chance to. I probably because I forgot to include it in show notes and things like that. But we recently had you talk about using technology and the glitches. Recently, here in the last couple of weeks, Rogers went down for
Right.
yeah, it was a
A
long time.
day.
What's that?
They went down for a day.
Yeah, and look at the chaos that caused.
That's
Uh,
true.
we're talking about going to a cashless society. Well, people couldn't do it. They couldn't buy groceries. They couldn't buy gas because people don't carry much cash on them anymore. Not like we used to. They fall into the convenience trap where you just tap your card, man, and the money comes right out of your account.
Right.
But
Good
can we
point.
are we so advanced with our technology that we can now move to a system of payment or a system of governing travel where we can rely on it 100%? No system's perfect. Even the cash system has its problems, bank robberies and people mugging you for your wallet, that kind of thing. There's inherently there's going to be problems no matter what we do, but the kind of problems we will get into if we move down this technological road too far, too fast. Because I like them too. Like I like my cell phone, I like my video games, I like my computer. Okay, all that stuff. I just went out and bought a fish finder and a GPS so that when I'm out on some of these big lakes out here, I don't get lost and I know where the fish are. Okay, I love that stuff. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, let's take the cashless society idea for a minute. What if it was for 2 days or 3 days or a week? What kind of chaos would reign then? You know, in other words, we cannot yet move yet. And I don't want to ever go to a completely cashless society because there's a couple of problems with it. Never mind the obvious, like how would I buy groceries? If you want to pay a kid $50 to mow your lawn, you pull it out of your wallet when he's done the job and you give him the $50 and he goes to the next guy. And that still happens. People plow driveways, and a lot of it's just cash between people and the government doesn't know about it. But if you remove that element, now you're talking about the government's ability to tax every penny, whether it's above the table or under the table. And there's a certain, I don't like that because, for the sake of $50 or $20 or whatever it is to get your gutters cleaned, you hire some kid with a ladder and he gets up there and scrapes all the moldy leaves out of it from the previous year so your gutters don't rot and the water runs the way it's supposed to. Okay. There's a place for that within our society. And it teaches kids great economic lessons. And it's also a way for people who are down and out, they can't get a job, they can create some income for themselves. I know a guy, when I was in the Navy, his name was Bruce. His dad, when they were going through tough times, would take a kid, or maybe it was you that told me this, would walk up and down the street carrying a box and he would sharpen knives for people. He'd go and walk up and down the street and knock on doors and say, do you have any knives you need sharpened? This is what I charge, And he would generate for his family a little bit of income that way so they wouldn't starve. And it was
Yeah.
very important to him to be able to do that. But if we have a cashless society or one that depends too much on technology, that opportunity is gone.
Yeah, it's not just I remember we talked about this a guy sharpening knives, and it wasn't because he was out on down on his luck and he needed to some extra income. That was his career,
Oh,
and the
that's what he
point,
did full time.
yeah, the point. Well, if you want to call it a career, that was how he made his living and looked after his family. And the point, I guess, is that I was making at that time, and that I would reiterate now, is not just the question of technology, but the fact that the day is gone where somebody can just have a good idea, go out and just do business casually with their neighbors or people on the street, and because they have to declare this, they have to pay their health tax, they have to pay workers' compensation, and don't even get me started on whether or not they actually have to have a license to be able to sharpen scissors and sharpen knives. I mean, so really, all of these things, again, interestingly enough, just to tie it back to what we were talking about in the last segment, Nick, all of these things that are put in place to not to control society, but to protect people from charlatans, and what have you. Okay, end up really basically undermining economic activity, and putting people in a position where they can't make a living on some of this stuff anymore, because the all of these barriers are there to actually working and earning money. Why shouldn't you and I be able to enter into an agreement where I do this and you pay me, and that's the end of it?
That's a
Anyway,
very,
so
that's
but
a
but
very good point.
yeah, but
And
but but
go
that's
ahead.
not a technology. That's not a technology issue. But you know, technology is a great thing, but at the same time, the old-fashioned way of doing things isn't so bad either if they work. And I think that this example with Rogers going down, and the ripple effects that it had for that particular day, I think is a very good illustration of our dependency on technology, and what happens when that technology fails. I remember the days when I would go to the bank, and I'd give them my cash, and yeah, because yeah, I worked at a place for a while where they got paid in cash, so
Right.
I'd go and I give them my cash, and they put it in, and I had my bank book, and my bank book wasn't a computer. It was they'd
Handwritten.
actually have to add it up.
Yeah, they have
Okay,
to.
well, if the computer went down, that wasn't a problem, was it? Okay, they had all of the paper records. Now, I'm not look, computer and the technologies and stuff like that is a wonderful thing, and it has really brought amazing blessings to our society. But let's not pretend that it hasn't come along with some consequences,
Yeah.
and some dangers as well. And I'm not talking about the cyborgs taking over society. Okay.
No, no, but I'm just when I brought that up, the idea of moving to a cashless society, there are stores out there who now do not accept cash. They simply won't.
See,
They don't want to handle it. They don't want to deal with it. And
see,
I understand it,
I always
but
thought that was illegal, because I always thought that you had to accept legal tender.
I always thought so too. But I know of at least one restaurant in downtown Ottawa that does not take cash. I've run into that a few times
Hmm.
now, and I think first of all, it's foolish, because what happens when the internet goes down and debit doesn't work? Can you afford to lose 24 hours worth of business? You know, it's a practical matter. It's not so much a regulatory one, it's a practical one. If you're a cabbie, okay, cabs work traditionally in cash. And when you get in the cab and say the fare's $20, you give the guy, if he's a good driver, you might give him 20, 22, 25, maybe 30, depending on the scenario. And if he's not a good driver, if he's just, you give him the fare and that's it. But it was always cash. So what does a cabbie do if all of a sudden he has no way of being paid? So does he park his car and wait for the internet to come home and lose all that revenue? You know, you don't know, because there's a lot of things that people take for granted. And I'm with you. There's a lot of blessings that have come. The fact that we can do the show at all is a benefit
true.
that has come from advancing technology. We were talking before the show that the kind of radio I did when I was at CFRA in Ottawa is completely, it's antique now by comparison to what we can do today.
Yeah.
Okay, we would need a full-blown studio to do this, or if it was on TV, you'd need the cameras and the directors and the producers, and there's still some of that going on. But for the most part, people can have their own. Well, look at Blaster Radio. Okay, look at what John's doing. You know, he hosts a lot more shows than just you and I, and it's all from his home. Couldn't have done that 10, 20 years ago. Okay, that was just not possible. The technology hadn't advanced that far. So I'm not against technology, but I am saying we need to be very careful about how we allow it to play out its role within our lives. And there's certain things we should never let go of. The ability to, when things go wrong, like the net goes down, to have, I think everybody should have some cash in the house so that if you need to go to the grocery store, at least you have a way of paying for what's in there if it's open. If not, then learning little skills, keeping skills like having a little bit of canned food on the shelf that you've prepared yourself, canning and so on. These kinds of things are survival techniques in times when you can't count on technology.
Now, let me tell you my Blast the Radio story, and John will appreciate this. John, by the way, is our producer. For those of you who don't know, he's listening in the background. When I go in the background, I don't mean the back here behind me. I mean, he's doing this from his own studio.
All the graphics and all that you see on the show and the switching of cameras, that's all John.
So I was in Fleet. I can't remember now what they call it, Fleet Instruments or Fleet whatever, down in Ottawa. You know the place, Nick, because it's beside the Trailing Edge in Bell's Corners.
Oh yes,
the neighborhood. And so I go in there from time. Over the years, if I need to purchase electronic stuff or
Fleet
whatever
Sound.
like that.
Yeah.
So Fleet Sound is John. So I'm in there and I'm at the cash and I'm talking to this guy, and he's like 60 years old. He's got hair down halfway down to his back, and you can tell he's had one or two trips, and I'm not talking about in the traveling sense over the course of his life. Anyway, nice enough guys and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing or making fun of them or anything like that, but I'm just trying to get people to have the picture. So I'm paying and I'm listening and I'm thinking, that's Lowell Green. So I asked the guy, I said, is that Lowell Green you're listening to? And he goes, yeah. He says, it's Lowell Green. I said, wow. I said, that's interesting. Haven't heard Lowell for a long time. So the guy says to me, he says, yeah, he says, we listen to all the time this great internet radio station, Blast the Radio. And he says to me, Blast the Radio. And I said, why do you listen to that? He says, well, because they have such a variety and stuff like that, and it's interesting. So they're in the store, they're playing Blast the Radio in the background for their customers all the time. So I knew that John would appreciate hearing that. So, there's my shout out to not just to Blast the Radio, but
I got it. Okay.
To Lowell Green. And by the way, just before you cut in there, Nick, just reminding people, okay, if you're watching us a replay of this show on YouTube, okay, don't forget to go to blasttheradio.com because there are a lot of amazing shows there, and you get to participate with us once a week live.
That's right.
Just make sure you visit, and even if it's just to check the website out, go there.
John has a very eclectic mix of shows. There's no question of that. But I have a story. It's a little bit along that line that my daughter ran into. My daughter and my niece. They were in a bookstore. I used to do a feature called Answer the Call, where I took 90 seconds of Canadian military history, produced them, recorded them, put sound effects to them, played them on the air. And they ran for about 3 years on CFRA. People loved it. And they went into this bookstore in Pembroke, a used bookstore. and the guy had CFRA on. And my daughter said, "Oh, you listen to CFRA?" He said, "Yeah, I just love that feature called Answer the Call. But that Nick Vandergragt, he's such an arrogant ass. I just can't stand him and just drives me nuts. He's so wrong so often. I mean, just I pull my hair out, but I love that feature." And she just kind of went quiet. And all of a sudden he realized she wasn't responding. And he said, "Wait, do you know him?" And she smiled and she said, "It's my dad." Well, you should. I wasn't there, of course, but she told me later. In his head, you could see the wheels going backwards really fast. He gave her about 4 or 5 military history books that he thought I might like, and that was the end of that. But oh man, it was fun. I laughed because look, when you're in a radio, when you're a public figure, whether it be radio or anywhere, you're gonna have people who love you and you're gonna have people who hate you.
Of course,
and it doesn't
sure.
matter. Okay, if you've
As
got
long as they don't know your home address.
I had one guy wanted to come to my home to do science experiments. George from Iron Prior. That's who it was.
George
For
from
those of you who
Arnprior,
don't
there's
know,
a name from the past.
that's right. I won't go into the details. If you're an American listening, this is just a very simple man. He's a lot of fun to listen to, but one thing you don't want him to do is to show up at your house to do experiments with LED lights in your windows. So sorry, George, if you're out there somewhere still listening, because I think he's still around. They even had a website, Spot George from Iron Prior was the name of the website. But quite a colorful character. I looking back on it, I really enjoyed my time talking to him. And one last note before we go, because I know we're right up against the clock. I think it was Craig was saying he's being encouraged to run down in Calabogie, which is a community southeast of Ottawa. Southeast, southwest?
Northwest.
South.
Northwest.
Ottawa's northwest from there.
No. Calabogie's northwest of Ottawa.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. I've been there. I was on Larry O'Brien's racetrack down there.
Yeah, northwest. It's a little north. It's west and a little north.
Well, okay.
It's past Arnprior.
Regardless of where it is. Yes, it is past Arnprior. But it's a lot closer to Perth than it is to Ottawa. Anyway, let's not waste any time with that.
Okay.
Craig, run is all I can say. He's being encouraged to run for the council down there. Run. They could use your common sense, logic, and reason. So by all means, run. And
if you're on council down there, Craig, you get to participate in the Nick and Joe show every week, and we can give you advice.
That's right. And by the way, he says I was right. By the way, it is southwest, northwest.
Come on, it's okay.
Joseph, you got to get out of that city more often.
I'm pulling up a Google map after the show.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Okay. With that, I have to bid you all good night. It's been a great show. We had a blast. Glad you could join us. So for Joseph and John and I'm going to wish you all a good night. In the meantime, we'll see you next Wednesday. Ubi caritas et amor, Deus ibi est. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace. And may you have a fair wind and a following sea.